It was a quiet September afternoon at 5 o'clock, but for Ronald Frederick Torbett, it wasn't just another day. No, this was the day he meticulously planned to commit his third murder. Ronald wasn't reckless, far from it. He prided himself on being careful, methodical, and, above all, sane. He knew the stakes were higher with each move. A career in homicide wasn't something you could afford to bungle. He'd read it once in a magazine. The longer you play the game, the riskier it gets. That line had stuck with him, haunting him ever since his first marriage. But Ronald wasn't stupid. He understood the danger of overconfidence, and whenever that intoxicating thrill of power surged within him, he crushed it without hesitation. This wasn't a game, it was science, a test of his genius. Standing over the bathroom sink in the freshly rented villa, Ronald stared into the mirror. His thin, pale face reflected back at him. His dark hair receded from a high forehead, and his piercing blue eyes gazed coldly. But it was his mouth that unsettled even him. A narrow, lipless slit that seemed to whisper cruelty. He tried to force a half smile, but even that looked sinister. A sudden noise from the kitchen snapped him out of his trance. He stiffened, listening carefully. It was Edith, his latest wife. She was likely done with her ironing and about to head upstairs for the bubble bath he had kindly prepared for her. That couldn't happen, not yet. He held his breath, listening intently. The sound of her footsteps faded, followed by the creak of the back door. He exhaled sharply. She was outside, hanging freshly pressed linens on the line. Good. He had a few extra minutes, but her habit of going into the yard annoyed him. What if the new neighbors struck up a conversation? What if someone got too friendly? He couldn't allow that. Edith wasn't like his other wives. She was more irritating. Of the 3 women he had charmed, married, and then methodically eliminated, she was by far the most bothersome. Still, he reminded himself of his strategy. His victims, no, his subjects, were always chosen carefully. Shy, reserved, isolated. Easy prey. Mary, his first wife, had been the perfect test run. Her tragic accident in a northern housing estate barely raised eyebrows. The coroner had been rushed, the neighbors indifferent, and even the local newspaper treated it like a mundane event. Honeymoon mishap. Dorothy, his second wife, was trickier. She had lied about being alone in the world, and her meddling brother had caused trouble after the funeral. But Ronald had handled it like a pro, winning a brief court case and pocketing the insurance money. 4 years, 2 wives, and now a clean slate. Then he met Edith. She was sitting alone in a seaside hotel dining room when he first spotted her. Her stiff posture and nervous eyes had screamed vulnerability. She was shy, awkward, and, best of all, alone in the world. Even her diamond brooch caught his eye from across the room. She was perfect. The romance was effortless. He played the role of the charming suitor, sweeping her off her feet with old-fashioned flattery and grand gestures. Within weeks, Edith was smitten. By the 5th week, they were married. By the 6th, she had made him the sole beneficiary of her will. But Edith had flaws that began to irritate him. She showed an annoying level of curiosity about his fabricated job as a cosmetics salesman and talked endlessly about visiting his office. Worse, she kept her financial papers locked away and refused to discuss them, no matter how subtly he probed. Ronald's patience wore thin. It was time to act. He stepped away from the window and began preparing the bathroom. He had painted the walls himself when they moved in, choosing a plain white to avoid drawing attention. Over the tub, he had installed a small shelf holding bath salts and an old-fashioned electric heater with 2 glowing elements. Switching the heater on, he watched the bars light up, their orange glow reflecting ominously off the white tiles. He turned and walked out, leaving the heater running. Everything was ready. The electricity in the house was cleverly concealed in the bottom of the linen cupboard at the top of the stairs, a design quirk Ronald Torbett had chosen deliberately. Calm but methodical, he opened the cupboard door with precise care, using a handkerchief to shield his fingerprints. With a swift, deliberate motion, he flipped the main switch, cutting power to the house. Back in the bathroom, the glow of the heater's bars faded into darkness. The once threatening red of the elements dulled into harmless black. Returning to the scene of his masterpiece, Ronald's sharp gaze fell on the heater resting in the bath, a tableau of deadly intent. It was perfect. The heater appeared to have accidentally fallen into the tub, its position convincingly staged. No one would question the tragedy once it unfolded. He allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The plan was airtight, ingenious, and above all, untouchable. Yet, even the most meticulously laid plans have their cracks. A faint sound pricked his ears. Ronald froze. Slowly, he turned his head toward the bathroom window. His heart sank. There, just above the flat roof of the scullery, Edith's neat head popped into view. She was clearing dead leaves from the gutter, a task she must have taken upon herself in her maddening sense of responsibility. She was precariously perched on a tall flight of steps, her frail frame a heartbeat away from a fall. Ronald's instincts kicked in. Panic? Not him. Cool as ever, he shielded his emotions and spoke with calculated mildness. "What on earth are you doing there, darling?" The sudden sound startled Edith so badly that she nearly lost her footing. Her pale face flushed with surprise, but she quickly regained her balance. "Oh, Ronald, you startled me. I thought I'd clear this before it rained. The gutter floods onto the back step when it's clogged." Her explanation grated on him. Still, he maintained his calm facade. "Very thoughtful," he said, his voice laced with faint amusement. Then, with a sting of condescension, he added, "But not terribly clever when you know I was upstairs preparing your beauty bath." Edith swallowed her embarrassment, avoiding his piercing gaze. "Perhaps it wasn't," she murmured, shrinking under his sarcastic tone. He softened, though only for effect. "Come down now," he urged. "Your bath is ready, and it's not going to stay perfect forever." She descended the steps obediently, allowing Ronald to slip back into the bathroom. In moments, he tore open the packet of rose-scented bath salts and poured them into the tub. The peach-colored crystals dissolved into a sea of fragrant, iridescent bubbles, forming a frothy disguise over the submerged heater. Perfect camouflage. "Edith," he called out cheerfully, masking his mounting tension, "your beauty bath awaits." Edith appeared in her blue dressing gown, the fabric strained around her slight frame. Her hair was tucked into an unflattering bathing cap, her expression uncertain. "Oh, Ronald," she said, eyeing the overflowing foam with apprehension. "Won't it make a terrible mess?" Her hesitation ignited his fury. "It won't matter," he snapped. "Get in now, while the foam's at its peak. Hurry up. I'll go and change while you relax." Edith, ever obedient, nodded. She entered the bathroom, locking the door behind her, a habit Ronald knew she wouldn't break. He waited, giving her just enough time to strip and slide into the tub. "How's the water?" he called out from the hallway, his voice dripping with false care. Her muffled reply came seconds later. "I don't know yet. I'm just getting in. It smells lovely." The words were music to his ears. Ronald's hand reached for the main switch, the handkerchief still wrapped around his fingers. 1, 2, 3, he counted under his breath. With a deliberate pull, the switch came down. Behind him, the silence of the house was shattered by a violent, splattering flare. Here's the rewritten version in a bold, engaging, and human tone. The house fell silent, an eerie void enveloping Ronald as he stood motionless, the fuse blown, and his plans momentarily halted. The quiet was so profound that it seemed to press against him, amplifying every mundane sound. He could hear the faint tick of the clock at the bottom of the stairs, the persistent drone of a trapped fly against the window pane, and the distant hum of a lawnmower as the neighbor, ruddy-faced and oblivious, tended to his perfectly manicured lawn. Yet, from the bathroom, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, no life. He waited, his breath shallow, before softly creeping back to the door and tapping it. "Edith?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Nothing. Not a creak, not a rustle. Just the same unbearable silence. "Edith!" He tried again, louder this time, but the only response was the hollow echo of his own voice. After a long pause, he exhaled deeply, the tension briefly leaving his shoulders. It was done. The silence confirmed it. Now, the second phase of his plan had to begin, the discovery. Timing was everything. Too soon, and suspicions might arise. Too late, and he risked losing control of the narrative. He'd learned this the hard way with Dorothy's accident, when an overeager reaction had drawn unnecessary questions from the inspector. This time, he vowed to get it right. Half an hour, he decided. Enough time to create a plausible alibi. He would buy an evening paper, ensuring his absence was noticed by any passers-by. But first, there was something else. Something he had long waited to do. Edith's leather writing case, her fortress of secrets, was tucked away in the bottom of her soft-topped canvas hatbox. She had foolishly believed he didn't know of its existence, a lie he had allowed her to keep until now. The thought of its contents, her savings, her private papers, sent a thrill through him as he slipped into the bedroom. Opening the wardrobe, he retrieved the case, its familiar weight promising rewards within. The lock resisted briefly, but Ronald's determination won out, and the catch gave way. Inside, the sight of neatly arranged papers and documents met his greedy gaze. Bundles of savings certificates were stacked neatly, alongside envelopes sealed with the crimson insignias of legal offices. Sitting atop the pile was the true prize, a blue savings book. His hands trembled as he flipped it open, scanning the entries. The numbers leapt out at him. 2,850 pounds, nearly 3,000 pounds. A smug grin tugged at his lips. Edith, for all her timid ways, had been quite the saver. But as he turned the pages, his elation turned to disbelief. His eyes locked onto a recent transaction. September 4th. A withdrawal. 2,798 pounds. The jarring realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The money was gone. Almost all of it. His mind raced, clinging to hope. Perhaps the cash was here, hidden somewhere in the case. He tore through the papers, discarding caution in his growing desperation. Certificates and letters scattered across the floor in a chaotic heap as he rifled through the envelopes, each one yielding nothing but disappointment. And then he saw it. A fresh envelope addressed to him, his name written in Edith's firm, steady hand. Ronald Torbett, Escon. His heart thudded in his chest as he ripped it open, unfolding the single sheet of paper inside. The date caught his eye immediately, only 2 days ago. He began to read, his pulse quickening with each word. "Dear Ronald, if you ever get this, I'm afraid it will prove a dreadful shock to you." The letter continued, and with each word, Ronald's world crumbled further, the truth unspooling in Edith's calm, deliberate handwriting. "Hoping it wouldn't come to this, Ronald. I'm sorry to say your behavior has left me no choice. I didn't want to believe it, I truly didn't. But you've forced me to confront some very unpleasant possibilities. You see, Ronald, you're old-fashioned. in ways you might not realize. Did it never occur to you that a homely, middle-aged woman, hurried into a whirlwind marriage with a stranger, might feel just slightly uneasy, especially when baths seemed to be your obsession? You didn't think I'd notice, did you? The peculiar way you fussed over the bathroom, your constant adjustments, the subtle hints. But women like me aren't as blind as you think. We read newspapers too, Ronald. Stories about James Joseph Smith, for example. Ring any bells? 2 wives, 2 baths, and 2 tragic accidents. Not exactly a coincidence, is it? At first, I didn't want to suspect you. I truly believed I was in love with you. But then you convinced me to write my will on our wedding day. Our wedding day, Ronald. Even a fool would raise an eyebrow at that. And when you couldn't stop meddling with the bathroom in this house, I realized I needed to act. Quickly. I, too, am old-fashioned in some ways, Ronald. I went to the police. Oh, don't be too surprised. You know those new neighbors who never seem to speak to you? The heavy-set man mowing his little lawn? He's Detective Constable Batsford from the CID. His assistant, the polite young woman you barely noticed, is Policewoman Richards. Lovely people, really. Over the garden wall, I shared my story, and they shared something in return. 2 newspaper clippings about bubble bath fatalities. The photos of the grieving husbands were blurry, but recognizable enough. And Ronald, wouldn't you know it? Your face stood out like a beacon. Those clippings led the inspector to you. They've been watching for 3 years, ever since the brother of your second wife handed over those photos. For them, it wasn't just a hunch, it was a waiting game. And I, foolishly, walked straight into their net by marrying you. But not all fools are completely blind, Ronald. I played along for a while, gathering courage. Women may be silly at times, but we're not as stupid as you'd like to think. We're learning. So, here's the truth. If you step into that bathroom to check on me, you'll find nothing. Not my body, not a trace of me. I've left the house, Ronald, through the roof, in case you were wondering. Right now, I'm sitting in the kitchen next door with Batsford and Richards, sipping tea and waiting for them to make their move. Oh, and one more thing. This was all a setup. The police assured me you wouldn't be prosecuted unless you attempted the crime again, so I forced myself to play along. To be brave. For those other women. Those poor wives who likely found you just as charming, just as magnetic as I did. P.S. I nearly forgot. When you see the police come for you, you might want to remember, it's not your slit mouth or twisted sneer that gave you away. It was your arrogance. You thought you were smarter than everyone, but you weren't smarter than me. Yours. Edith Ronald's hand shook as the letter fell from his grip. For a moment, he stood frozen, the weight of Edith's words crashing down on him like a tidal wave. His heart pounded against his ribs, the silence around him now deafening. And then, faintly, came the sound of footsteps approaching the door. 40. Let's dive into the real meat of the story, shall we? Triumph of Chance by Marjorie Allingham. A tale dripping with tension, deception, and poetic justice. But first, let's talk about the genius behind it. Marjorie Louise Allingham. A name that sits comfortably among the queens of crime. Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers, and Guy Marsh, the golden generation of mystery writers who shaped the genre as we know it today. Born in 1904 into a literary family, writing wasn't just in her blood, it was her legacy. Her father, a journalist and editor. Her mother, a writer for women's magazines. Marjorie? She wasn't going to be left behind. By 8 years old, she was already published. 8. Some of us were still figuring out how to tie our shoes at that age. Fast forward to her adult years, and she's breaking new ground in crime fiction. Her big breakthrough came with The Crime at Black Dudley in 1929, which introduced her now iconic detective, Albert Campion. Initially a side character, Campion's charm and wit stole the show, and he went on to star in a whole series of novels and stories. But here's the thing. Marjorie's writing isn't just about whodunits. It's about how she tells the story. Her intricate plots, razor-sharp humor, and characters that practically leap off the page. Now, on to Triumph of Chance. Right from the opening line, she hooks you. Ronald Torbett was meticulously preparing for his third murder. Boom, you're in. You're intrigued. And you're already asking, who's this guy and what makes him tick? That's the hallmark of Allingham's storytelling. She knows how to reel you in, and before you know it, you're knee-deep in suburban England. Quiet streets, neat little houses, and lurking danger. The setting is classic post-World War I England, an era when consumerism was budding and housing estates were sprawling across the countryside. It's all so ordinary until it isn't. Ronald, a man with a twisted ambition, has successfully ended 2 marriages, with fatal results. He's now sharpening his claws for a third kill. He's careful, meticulous, and chillingly self-assured. But here's where it gets good. His latest wife, Edith, isn't your average victim. Oh no, she's sharp, resourceful, and refuses to be anyone's footnote. When Ronald's plan begins to unravel, it's not because he slips up, it's because Edith outsmarts him. She's been quietly watching, piecing the puzzle together, and collaborating with the neighbors, who just happen to be undercover police officers. That letter she leaves for him? Absolute gold. A mic drop moment, written with the precision of a scalpel. Women may be silly, but they're not as stupid as they used to be. That line alone is a chef's kiss. The story plays with our expectations masterfully. Ronald's arrogance blinds him to the fact that the very people he underestimates, his wife, the ordinary neighbors, are the ones sealing his fate. By the time the police burst through the door, you can almost taste the justice. Allingham's brilliance lies in how she balances tension with character depth. Ronald isn't just a villain. He's a cautionary tale of hubris and miscalculation. Edith isn't just a victim. She's the embodiment of resilience and wit. This isn't just a story about a murder gone wrong. It's a study in power dynamics, deception, and the surprising strength of those underestimated. It's the perfect blend of dark humor and suspense, proving once again why Marjorie Allingham's work still resonates today. So, was 3 really a lucky number for Ronald? Well, let's just say, not quite. What do you think? Was Edith's takedown satisfying? Does Ronald get what he deserves? Let's talk about it, because this is the kind of story that sticks with you long after the last word. Here's a rewritten, bold, engaging, and dynamic version in a detailed and conversational style, perfect for grabbing and holding attention. Let's talk about Triumph of Chance by Marjorie Allingham. A masterpiece of subtle suspense, dark humor, and poetic justice. This isn't just any crime story. It's a deliciously crafted tale that takes the seemingly mundane and flips it into a playground of danger and empowerment. Now, first, let's get the setting straight. The story unfolds in a bland, unremarkable suburb, the kind of place where nothing exciting ever seems to happen. And that's the point. Ronald Torbett, our cold-blooded antagonist, has chosen this setting deliberately. Why? Because it's boring. It's the perfect camouflage for a man who wants to disappear into the everyday, blending into the beige background of suburbia while plotting his heinous acts. Ronald is a textbook sociopath. He's calculated, meticulous, and devoid of empathy. His pride comes from his ability to manipulate and control without a shred of remorse. Like many narcissistic killers, he considers himself far more intelligent than everyone around him, especially the police. He plays the role of an ordinary man, but beneath that mask lies a predator who views people as pawns in his twisted game. What makes the story so compelling is its ordinary setting paired with its extraordinary events. The banality of suburban life contrasts sharply with Ronald's dark intentions. It's this juxtaposition that hooks you. Think about it. The same streets where kids ride their bikes and neighbors trim their hedges are also the stage for Ronald's calculated murders. But here's where the story takes a thrilling turn. Enter Edith, Ronald's third wife. She seems like the perfect victim at first glance, a homely, middle-aged woman who appears naive and trusting. Exactly the kind of person Ronald believes he can outwit. But Edith, she's anything but helpless. Marjorie Allingham masterfully builds up Edith's character, allowing the audience to underestimate her just as Ronald does. And then, in one glorious twist, she flips the script. Edith isn't oblivious. She's been paying attention, piecing together the clues, and even working with the undercover neighbors, who, as it turns out, are detectives. That letter she leaves for Ronald? Pure brilliance. A mic drop moment that strips him of his power and seals his fate. Women may be silly, but they're not as stupid as they used to be. That line alone is a thunderclap of empowerment. Edith takes back control in a world that often underestimates women, proving she's not just a survivor but a victor. Now, let's dive into the themes because there's a lot to unpack here. 1. The banality of evil. Ronald thrives on his ability to hide in plain sight. He's not a caricature of a villain. He's disturbingly ordinary. That's what makes him so chilling. His mundane existence, a boring job, a quiet house, acts as a perfect cover. It's a reminder that evil doesn't always wear a mask or a cape. Sometimes it wears a suit and lives next door, too. Power and control. Ronald's murders aren't about money or revenge, they're about power. He craves the thrill of holding someone's life in his hands and knowing he has the ultimate control. But even more than that, he prides himself on his self-discipline, on his ability to hold back until the time is right. That's the depth of his narcissism. He doesn't just want power over his victims. He wants to prove he's better, smarter, more disciplined than anyone else. Third, female empowerment. Edith's victory isn't just personal, it's symbolic. She represents resilience and wit, a stark contrast to the victim narrative Ronald expected her to fulfill. Allingham subtly critiques societal expectations of women, showing that strength often lies where you least expect it. Edith's triumph isn't just over Ronald, it's over the stereotype of women as passive or powerless. 4. Deception and appearances. The story is a masterclass in how appearances can deceive. Ronald plays the part of an ordinary man so well that he almost gets away with murder, literally. But Edith plays her part too, pretending to be oblivious while secretly plotting her escape. It's a game of masks, and in the end, Edith's is the one that holds. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the craft of the story. Allingham doesn't waste a single word. From the opening line, she grabs your attention. Ronald Torbett was meticulously preparing for his third murder. Boom. No fluff, no filler. You're instantly intrigued, already wondering who this man is and what's about to happen. The pacing is tight, the tension builds steadily, and the payoff is immensely satisfying. It's also worth noting how Allingham uses the ordinary to amplify the extraordinary. Imagine this story in a flashy setting like Beverly Hills or the Hamptons. It wouldn't have the same impact. The blandness of the suburb magnifies the horror of Ronald's actions and the brilliance of Edith's response. And let's talk about Ronald's character for a moment. His choice to live such a dull, controlled life is fascinating. It's as if he's constantly playing a role, performing the part of the ordinary man while hiding his true self. There's almost something tragic about it. Imagine spending your life pretending to be someone you're not, all in service of your own delusions of grandeur. But ultimately, this story isn't about Ronald. It's about Edith and her refusal to be a victim. It's about resilience, intelligence, and the quiet strength that so often goes unnoticed. So, was 3 really a lucky number for Ronald? Not in the slightest. But for Edith? It was the number of times she needed to outwit him, and she nailed it. Now, let's hear your thoughts. Did Edith's victory feel as satisfying to you as it did to me? Do you think Ronald got what he deserved? And how do you feel about Allingham's portrayal of the ordinary turned extraordinary? Let's discuss, because this story has layers worth peeling back. So that was the story. I hope you found it captivating and thought-provoking. There's much more where that came from, so stay tuned for upcoming tales. Be sure to share the podcast, spread the word, and let others dive into these thrilling stories. I'm feeling more confident than ever in creating these journeys on my own. After experimenting with guest narrators, I've come to realize that what truly sets this podcast apart is, well, me, my voice, my take, my unique perspective. So, yeah, I'll be bringing all the stories back in-house, so to speak. But let's not dwell on the work ahead. There's too much excitement to be had. More mysteries, more dark humor, more twists, and yes, more suspenseful tales are coming your way. Stay tuned, stay curious, and let's keep exploring the depths of these fascinating stories together. Until next time, keep wondering, keep listening, and let's unravel more of these captivating narratives. Cheers.